John chapter 4, first 3 verses of this chapter, we learn that the Pharisees have taken an interest in Jesus, an unwanted interest in Jesus that makes Jesus uncomfortable, and he decides that he's going to leave. The wording of verse 3 is intriguing. So when the Lord learned of this, when he learned that they were talking about him, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. The word translated, he left, is used for leaving something behind. So John actually uses again in verse 28 of the woman who leaves behind her water jar. It could be translated as abandon. As far as we can tell, Jesus, after this point, only returned to Judea occasionally for the appointed feasts, and then he'd leave again. He left Judea. Excuse me. Verse 4 says that he had to go through Samaria. If you use the King James Version, what you're going to see is he must needs go through Samaria. Both the word that John uses and where he puts it in the sentence make it very emphatic. Jesus had to go to Samaria. But why he had to go to Samaria is unclear. Now, it's true that the route through Samaria was the shortest one, but it wasn't the usual one. Many Galilean Jews wouldn't go into Samaria at all. They would cross. So 3 times a year they went to Jerusalem. That was part of their lifestyle. And during those times they would cross, so to the east side of the Jordan, travel down through Perea, not through Samaria, and then when they were south of the Samaritan border, they would cross back into Judea and go to Jerusalem. And then they would just do it the other way around when they came back, avoiding Samaria. I'll explain why in just a minute. But Jesus had to go through Samaria. And it wasn't because he was in a hurry. I believe that his Father was directing him there. In fact, the word that John uses that we have in verse 4 is he had to go through Samaria. Whatever that's used of Jesus, it has something to do with his mission. So, for example, in chapter 3, the Son of Man must be lifted up. In chapter 9, he must do the work of the one who sent him. In chapter 10, he must bring his other sheep from other folds to him. So you'll get the idea. It has to do with his mission. Other Jews might avoid Samaria on principle. Jesus was on a mission, and it was going to lead him right into the heart of Samaria. Now, I wonder if he knew why the Father was leading him there. Did he receive some special foreknowledge that he was going to meet a Samaritan woman, or was it more like a feeling, an intuition? Did he know more than you or I would have known had we been in that situation? We can't be sure, but I suspect that he went without a detailed understanding of his mission. He only knew that his Father was leading him to go through Samaria. When he came to a village called Sychar, which is not far from the capital city, which was Shechem, he and his disciples went different ways. The disciples went into town to buy provisions, while Jesus stopped at Jacob's well, Jacob from the Old Testament, and the Greek word indicates a spring-fed well. It's worth noting that Jesus was tired. So this gospel, which asserts the deity of Jesus emphatically, begins with him as the eternal Son of God, who was with God and is God, also very clearly shows us that Jesus, this eternal God, became one of us. He experienced hunger. He experienced frustration and weariness. So when the author of Hebrews in chapter 4 says that he was tempted in every way, just as we are, that not only means that he suffered a great variety of temptations, it means he suffered them at the worst possible moments. When he was tired, when he was sad, when he was lonely. In other words, just like we do. While he's sitting there at the well, a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Now, it's going to help us understand the passage if we know something about Samaritans in general and about this woman in particular. We'll start with the woman. First, it was odd that she came here and that she came here when she did. I mean, for one thing, Jacob's well was not in the village, which almost certainly had its own well. This area had lots of water. Why walk further than necessary when it meant carrying back a heavy jar of water? It's also odd that she came at noon. The time for drawing water was in the evening, when the sun wasn't so hot in the burning Palestinian sky. Now, she may have come to Jacob's well because it had better water. Maybe that's why she came. Or maybe she thought that Jacob's well water was somehow blessed, and that's why she came. We don't know. It may have been because she wanted to avoid other people. We just can't be certain. What about the Samaritans generally? Quite simply, what you need to know is Jews despised them. I'll give you some background. At one time, the people living in this area were Jews. All the people here were Jews at one time. But they were in a war with Assyria, and they were soundly defeated. And the Assyrians deported most of the Jews and then imported non-Jews to resettle the region, thinking that they would not feel so much need to fight over turf if this turf wasn't theirs to begin with. The people who were imported did not at first worship Israel's God, Yahweh. That's how most scholars think his name is pronounced. I mean, the name is all over the Old Testament. However, Hebrew does not use vowels. And so we have to guess at what vowels are there and ancient Hebrew. And so we think that it's pronounced Yahweh. When these people were first imported into the land, they started worshiping, they weren't worshiping God at first, but then they started worshiping Yahweh, the Lord. It was, though, in a combination, it was syncretistic worship. So they're worshiping Yahweh, the God of Israel, along with worshiping other gods. Over the centuries, they came to worship only the Lord. But their rituals and their rites were different from that of the Jews who were living in Judea. Eventually, those Jews in Judea were also deported, not by Assyria, but by Babylon. The 587 BC, if you had a few dates in mind to talk about, if you're thinking of the Old Testament and you want to build some kind of framework, this is one of the most important dates, 587 BC, the fall of Jerusalem. When they were finally permitted to return 70 years later, the very first thing they did was start to rebuild the temple. And at first, they built an altar. And then they built a temple around the altar. The Samaritans who were living there, had lived there for over 100 years, came to them and offered to help with the rebuild. And the Jews turned them down outright. They did not want help from these heretic Samaritans. That whole thing, there's all kinds of tension. You can read about it, Ezra and Nehemiah, between the Samaritans and the Jews. And it only got worse because once the temple was built, the Jews insisted that the only place people could worship Yahweh was at that temple in Jerusalem. The Samaritans, they disagreed and they built their own temple on Mount Gerizim. That so outraged the Jews. A temple dedicated to Yahweh outside of Jerusalem? It was unthinkable that some Jewish zealots snuck into Samaria and burned down their temple. It was an act of terrorism. The Samaritans, they responded by sending a group of people into Jerusalem on just before the Day of Atonement, the most holy day in Judaism. And they sacrificed pigs in the temple area to make it unclean so that the Jews could not celebrate the Day of Atonement. The hostility between them continued until eventually Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And after that, the whole land changed. Relations between Jews and Samaritans were so bad at the time that Jesus met this woman at the well For a Jew to call someone a Samaritan was an insult. When some Jews got really angry with Jesus, the worst thing they could think of to say to him was, "You are a devil-possessed Samaritan." Now, older scholars thought that this woman at the well was not only a member of this despised minority, but that the despised minority despised her. They believed she was sexually immoral. I mean, the wife of 5 husbands, and possibly a prostitute. Some of the church fathers would call her a prostitute. Recent scholarship has offered very different and kinder alternatives, and we don't know which, if either, is true. What we do know is that this woman had a in-your-face kind of persona. She's not somebody who backs down, and you're going to see that as we go on. I think when Jesus, sitting there at the well, saw this woman coming to the well at noon, not the usual time for drawing water, he realized this is the reason he had to go through Samaria. He spoke first to her, but what he said was abrupt and almost rude. He said, "Give me a drink." Now the NIV softens that, "Will you give me a drink?" But it's a command in Greek. It's an imperative mood verb. "Give me a drink." Now, I'll read from verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews, John's going to explain to us, Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Well, if Jews don't associate with Samaritans, why did the disciples go into the village to buy supplies? The answer lies in that word translated associate with. It is an unusual word. This is the only place it's used in the New Testament. It's a compound verb that means to use with. What the woman is really saying is that Jews will not use Samaritans' utensils or cups. So the rabbi said that if a person were to drink from a cup that a Samaritan had used, it would make him unclean for a week and disqualify him from public worship, from community life. Samaritan women, according to rabbis, were always perpetually unclean. That's why this woman is so surprised. How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? Right? Do you hear some attitude in that? When Jesus said, this is verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. When he says this, she replies, and I'm going to paraphrase, you ain't got no pail. So where are you going to get this living water? Now, pause there for a sec. Living water sounds mystical to us. And we know that water is a metaphor for the Holy Spirit. But living water, and that time period, was just one way of saying running water, which is what this woman would naturally think Jesus meant. Because the well was spring-fed, remember John uses that unusual word to describe it, it provided living water, but Jesus had no pail. The word that she uses refers to a skin that travelers would carry with them just for this purpose of drawing water out of wells. Apparently the disciples had it with them in the village. So the woman's tongue gets a little sharp here. This is verse 12. Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself? In other words, just who do you think you are? Jesus, I love this about him, he's unwilling to take offense. You know, any other Jew in this kind of conversation would be done right here. But Jesus answers her, this is verse 13, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Now, Jesus is talking about the Spirit, which God gives to those who give themselves to Jesus. But in the woman's mind, this does not make any sense. This is all nonsense. So look at what she says. Sir, give me this living water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. Now, it is possible that you can take this as something she's saying with absolute sincerity. I suspect, though, that this is sarcasm. Sir, give me some of your living water. And if you have some magic beans to go with it, I'll take those too. And sarcasm was her shield. Now, Jesus understands people. Back in chapter 2, John wrote, nobody had to tell him about people because he knew what was in a person. And we see that in this passage too. He says, go, call your husband and come right back. Her answer, verse 17, is very short. It's terse. But the sarcasm is all gone at this point. She says, I have no husband. Look at what Jesus says to her. You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands. And the man you now have is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. This is how I think the woman heard Jesus. Finally, you've said something that isn't rubbish. It's true that you don't have a husband, but you have had 5 of them. And the guy you're with right now, you're just living together. That was a little too close to home. So the woman, she's really good at keeping people at arm's length, skillfully changes the subject. She brings up what was the perennial controversy between Jews and Samaritans. She says, I can see you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain. So they're sitting there looking at Mount Gerizim. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is Jerusalem. She's trying to start an argument. With a line like that, a Samaritan could start an argument with any Jew except Jesus. He didn't take the bait. He said to her, verse 21, the time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Verse 22, you Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Now, notice that salvation is not to the Jews, but from them. Salvation was never meant to be limited to Jews. It was meant, read Isaiah 49 sometime, it was meant to flow out of them to the rest of the world. Now, are you hearing what Jesus is saying? Worship is not a matter of place. It is not a matter of race. It's not a matter of knowledge. A time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. See, it's not the right place, like a church building, that makes worship true. It's the right person. And the Father is seeking that person. And not just among the Jews, but also among the Samaritans, and even among the Gentiles. That's you and me. Jews and Samaritans, they had argued. So Jerusalem fell in 587 BC. The rebuilding started just over 70 years later. So that was 500 years ago. And Jews and Samaritans had been arguing about the place of worship ever since. They fought battles over it. They were willing to kill for it. And Jesus passes over it as if it were of no importance at all. After he came, he changes everything. True worship no longer happened at a particular place, but in a peculiar people. People who worship in spirit, not just in form, and in truth, not just in words or in emotion. Now, following the back and forth of this dialogue, it's a lot like watching a fencing bout. Jesus says something, the woman tries to parry it, but he keeps advancing and she keeps retreating. Finally, she says, I know, this is verse 25, I know the Messiah is coming. When he comes, he'll explain everything. That is a closing line, if ever I've heard one. It's her way of ending the bout and getting away from this stranger. But Jesus wasn't done. In fact, he says the most surprising thing yet. You say that when Messiah comes, he'll explain everything? Well, this is verse 26. I who speak to you am he. Now, what's surprising about that? He was the Messiah. Well, for one thing, up to this point, Jesus has not told anyone in Israel that he's the Messiah, not even his own disciples. He makes the grand disclosure first to a Samaritan woman. It would be like the College of Cardinals announcing the election of the Pope at the United Pentecostal Church's General Convention. This is also extraordinary, and we're going to be thinking about this a lot over the next few months. A more literal translation of what Jesus says. You have it on the screen here. I who speak to you am he. Go back to that previous slide. I who speak to you am he. But the Greek runs differently. So a literal translation would be, and I can't give it to you word for word because it would be too clumsy to do it that way. But a more literal translation is, I who speak to you, I am. In Greek, ego I am a me. It's very emphatic. I am. So when Moses asked God who he should tell Israel's leaders had sent him, God said, tell them, I am sent me to you. The very name of God. Yahweh, remember what we talked about that earlier? Yahweh sounds like I am in Hebrew. When Jesus said something similar to this in John chapter 8 to a group of Jews, they picked up stones to stone him for blasphemy. I who speak to you, I am. Verse 27. Just then, the disciples returned and were surprised. Surprised is an understatement. The Greek word means they marveled to find him talking to a woman. But no one asked, what do you want, or why are you talking with her? So rabbis did not ordinarily speak to women in public. And some rabbis wouldn't even speak to their wives in public. Most Jews would not talk to a Samaritan at all. And here is Jesus announcing to a Samaritan woman that he is the long-awaited Messiah, the seed of Abraham, the son of David. It's absolutely astounding. Okay, let's take this and let's apply. We don't know this woman's backstory. A lot of things have been said about her over the centuries, but we really don't know her backstory. Whether she was an immoral relationship saboteur, whether she was a remarkably unfortunate widow, or the victim of repeated abuse. But what is undoubtedly true is that she had done some bad things, and some bad things had been done to her. Not unlike us. And then she met Jesus, and meeting him changed her life. It's clear she tried to keep Jesus at arm's length. We do that too. We'll give him an hour on Sunday morning, maybe put some money in the plate, but that's close enough for most of us. But Jesus was not interested in an arm's length relationship with this woman, and he's not interested in an arm's length relationship with you. He wants you, not your money, not your church attendance. He will not be satisfied with a long distance relationship. And guess what? You won't be either. God's like a hurricane. At the center of the storm, at the eye, the winds grow completely calm. It's peaceful. Far away from the eye, the winds are just moderate. But in between, close but not in, the winds are punishing. It's like that with God. Try to stay at arm's length from him, in proximity, but not in love, and you will be buffeted mercilessly. You will either move away, and I've seen people do that, or you will come near. You can never be satisfied, and you will certainly never be comfortable with a half-hearted relationship with God. But step into his wild love. Get close to him, and you'll find peace. A couple of other things. Jesus went to Samaria to find this woman. Like his father, in verse 24, who is seeking people, Jesus is seeking people, and he'll go anywhere to find them. St. Peter wrote that he descended into Hades. He'll go to Samaria, he'll go to Hades, he'll go to your house. And he does so because he loves us. After the woman met Jesus, she went back to her village and she introduced her neighbors to him. This is verse 29. Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ? Now, I'm going to suggest you do the same thing. Go to your neighbors. And our society today, which is so absolutely mobile, our neighbors sometimes are not the people in the house next to us, but the people at work. Our neighbors can be people who are miles away, but who we're close with. Go invite them, introduce them to Jesus. Sometimes we think, I can't do that. I don't know enough. I still have too many questions. I don't have all the answers. She didn't go to them with all the answers. She went to them with a question. Could this be the Christ? Look at verse 39, though. Here are the results. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. She just told them what Jesus was like and asked them if he might not be the Christ, that is, might not be what they've been waiting for. We can do that. We don't need all the answers. All right, one last thing. You might be in the position of the Samaritans to whom she went back and talked. You believed, this is verse 39, because of what someone else told you at some point. It could have been your parents. And that is good. But it will not always be good enough. You, like the Samaritans, need to go on to know Jesus for yourself. If you don't do that, then you're going to eventually find yourself away from him. If you don't know how to do that, talk to a Christian friend whose relationship with God you admire and say, how do you do it? What is this like? But more importantly, talk with God himself. If you intend to have a deep relationship with him, tell him. And he will see to it that you do.